Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it correct. And this is Tom Navolis, your host. I'm so delighted that you are back with me again this week. Last week was one I did a rerun, and I'm really glad that I did. There was one of those programs when you go back in time and you sit there and you listen to what it was yourself, and you're going, oh, wow, that makes a lot of sense. It was talking about economy in a whole different way when we take a look at who. We talked about John Adams last week, and none other than the Canon and Feudal law. And at that time, I did a comparison of the Canon and Feudal law somewhat to today, especially from the feudal system, and how it is now being brought back upon us. Well, I have to tell you, that gave me some real drive to look at modernizing John Adams' work. I don't know that I'll be able to do it justice in the same way that he did, but very interesting in relationship, once again, through those mirrors of history and what we have. But this week, as you received your newsletter, this is the 2022 election deception 1984 style. And I did write that style differently because that's more of a Russian representation in style. Now, why'd I do that? Well, let me open up with this quote there from the newsletter. But they are not the only crazy persons. Well, I was visiting with the Brazilian philosopher Olavo de Carvalho last month. He gifted me with a fascinating little volume by Harry Redner titled The Malign Master. The book suggests that the unifying undercurrent of the last 100 years of Western philosophy was solipsism, which may be defined as a theory in philosophy that your own existence is the only thing that is real or that can be known. And this was on a Prokavastia commentary for 16 October 2016 by J.R. Nyquist. I had to search for what we were going to talk about this week, and I was going to follow up some more on economy. I promised you about Soule's book, a little bit of a comparison with Gary North, and that there are areas there that just line up so nicely. But I was captivated by the idea that 1984 was a very interesting book in and of itself. In that book, we look at how government and the whole political ideas and philosophies apparently shifted, how much we're looking at despotism and totalitarianism. With that, I rediscovered, as I was going through my archives of different material that I have in my very voluminous digital library. I think I have probably over 10,000 works in there that I take a look at from time to time or have read to some level of completion, if not complete. But in there I found a interesting book that was written by a high-level Russian communist defector. He defected in 1961. I'm not going to get into the details. That's in your references and all about that. The important part is that there is a communist strategy of deception and disinformation that has been in play for decades, which a number of us who have taken and studied communism for multiple decades are quite aware of. But in fact, many of you that are especially in the church community have totally ignored. In fact, as I've mentioned before, there's one of the megachurch pastors here in Northeast Ohio who claimed that communism was dead. We don't even need to pay attention to it anymore. It's dead. Anybody that talks about it is nonsense. Well, they are wrong. I mentioned that before. They have been wrong, and they are naively ignorant, anyone that says that. Now, I want to jump before we get into the articles or Golitsyn's books or the articles about Golitsyn, which we're going to discuss throughout this program, is I want to take you back to 1963. And this is directly out of the congressional record. And this is an appendix that's there, pages A34 and A35 on January 10th, 1963. I've talked to you about this in the past. And this is the current goals of communist ideologies. And it was read into the record by A.S. Herlog, Jr. of Florida. And what I really wanted to hit on is not all of these 45 goals that the communists have virtually implemented, but I want to pull out a few that then will have parallelisms to the writings in the book that I want to discuss, as well as the other predictions that have been fundamentally fulfilled by virtue of the communist activity, especially here in the United States as well as globally. I want to bring this into the context, and I'll try and wrap that together in the third segment, is that just to ping your mind up front, hopefully to keep your interest through the rest of the programming, is that there is a lot that we have to pay attention to in the candidates in the elections. I did watch Trump speak down in Texas this past week, and I have to say I'm very delighted that he's finally bringing it out that the conversation is not about socialism in America anymore. It is blatantly about the communist regime in America now that it's in play. So let's take a quick look at those 45 goals and think about them in relationship to the people that are running for office, especially those that are either already elected or those that are running in, especially the blue states, for Congress and the Senate. They are, by every definition of the word, communist or jihadist, between the two. And if you've studied communism at all, there has been that great melding of the two over the last 30, 40 years. So what we have is the setups in East and West Germany as separate states, despite Khrushchev, but then we see that the East and West came apart. I have a video referenced in here where there is actually dossiers about Angela Merkel being an East German communist youth leader and her appearing in uniform as a Eastern European, Eastern communist, East German communist specifically, youth leader. No wonder Germany is acting the way that it is. It's, getting crazy. For those on the radio, I'm taking a sip of my coffee, so think about that for a couple minutes. With that, what we have is this whole greeny-weeny stuff is once again, all of it, a religion. And also that's well referred to in the video that I have there referenced for you. Communism is its own form of religion. Its God is what? Its God is humanism. Its God is science. It has nothing to do with the true biblical God of the Reformation and our founders here in America. So there's all this nonsense that was going on in number 9 of the 45 goals to prolong the conferences to ban the atomic test because the U.S. agreed to suspend tests, allow the Soviet satellite individual representation in the United Nations. Drop on down here, which I think is very interesting in relationship to oaths, and not oats, O-A-T-S, but O-A-T-H-S, an oath, is to do away with all loyalty oaths. And we saw, especially in America, that Obama did that in relationship to the oath of becoming a naturalized citizen. How much of that was changed in reference to what it should be in dismissing everything else and becoming a real American. That was pretty much watered down to nothing. Capture one or both of the political parties in the United States. Very interesting. We fundamentally have the uniparty. There's also in the video that I have referenced some very interesting revelations on William F. Buckley and his connections and being a CIA officer, so on and so forth. And as you well know from John Stormer's book, None Dare Call It Treason, the CIA has been in collusion with the KGB and communists, especially when it came to China, Korea, and a number other of the nations becoming communist. They participated with the State Department in a lot of that over the many decades. So, what's going on with the so-called conservatives? Making them leftist. So what we also have is continue giving Russia access to the U.S. Patent Office. And in doing so, what we have then is that we're trying to see that not only has Russia gotten that, so has China has stolen or gets a lot of technical information right from us. The court system, excuse me a moment here. Hold it here. In the court system, what we have going on is we're seeing here is that to weaken the courts and weaken the institutions, and by claiming the activities violate civil rights. Now we're seeing that all over. And the destruction of morality and economics, so right where we are, has been the workup of the communists in the United States for over 80 plus years. It's all well documented, and it's even more so documented in what we're going to be talking about in the second and third segment as to this high-level Russian defector. They still haven't gotten the gun control, but get control of schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum. Get control of the teachers' associations and unions, and put the party line in textbooks. Infiltrate the press. We've seen all of that. All the editorial writing, policy making, gain control of the positions in radio and TV. Motion pictures. We've seen all of that. Break down culture, standards of morality. Promoting pornography, obscenity, magazines, motion pictures, present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. Ladies and gentlemen, these are just some of the basics on those attacks that we've been having. Some of that I brought to you before. Unfortunately, we have not taken and adequately addressed that from a perspective of the churches and the pulpits, as I've talked to you about many, many times. We're seeing an uptick in that now. We're seeing that more historical perspective is being brought even into a number of the churches that do not have reformed positions, but are seeing that there's so many problems that we need to deal with it, and we need to understand how to address that even from a biblical perspective. Sam Adams understood all of those types of things. The anti-federalists clearly had a good mindset on that. So as we follow up on this, I really hope that you'll come back now for the second and then the third segment when Samuel Adams returns. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists absolutely did get it correct. And we were talking about the 45 goals of the communist for America. And we're seeing very predominantly all of the various activities. Now, I ended the last segment talking about the churches starting to pick up on some ideas. We talked about the moral degradation of everything. But number 27 on the list is to infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion, discredit the Bible, and emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a religious crutch. Eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in schools on the grounds that it violates the principles of separation of church and state. We've seen that. We see that all the time. And we've seen now the institution of new religion, the religion of not only humanism being the top religion in the United States, as we've talked about in other programs, but also the religion of the greenness, the whole idea of all the green wackadoodle environmentalism. Discrediting the American founders. We see the statues being pulled down, belittling all forms of American culture, and discouraging the teaching of American history. We've seen all of that. That's all part of it. That's all happened. Eliminating all laws or procedures which interfere with the operation of communist enterprises. We know that. Here's one that now you have to understand. This one is now we have conservatives calling for the elimination or discrediting the eventual dismantling of the FBI. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. We know that government has been so infiltrated in so many different ways that now it's been used no different than the GRU or the KGB to take and come in and attack patriotic citizens, to the point now where you have the pundits calling themselves conservative pundits that are talking about the dismantling of the FBI. Well, discrediting it. Wow. Wow, wow. Pretty interesting. The infiltration and gain control of big business. We have that with all the big technology companies. We're seeing that in the banking system. This whole thing on ESG, the environmental, sustainable, and all of that on governance, on businesses, enforcing that all the way through. They already have dominated the psychobabble out there, as we've talked about in the past. So, very interesting, very interesting. So the articles that I want to come about and talk to you about were one that was done in the American Thinker back in 2010. And this is, did communism fake its own death in 1991? Very interesting article. This is from a 1984 book, ex-KGB major Anatoly Golitsyn. He predicted the liberalization of the Soviet Union and said that it would be a strategic deception. And then he goes through, and the article goes through on how to examine the facts. And then what will his predictions be? He wrote a book called New Lies for Old. And it's definitely, I'm telling you right here, you have a link to it. It is not light reading. And in the last two chapters of the book, the article says is that it is where the predictions are of what will happen. And quite frankly, out of all of the predictions that he made, very few did not occur, have not occurred. So, it's very interesting. He had a lot of insights. He was able to take and formulate those. Interestingly enough, because of some of the sensitivity of everything, he had to clear things through to CIA. Because remember, he was a defector here to America. Now, interesting on how he looks at this being a deception. And he actually wrote a second book that is out there. Very interesting second book. And let me find the title of that one for you. It is none other than, I'm looking for it. It is called The Perestroika Deception. And this is the Second October Revolution and what that means and how did it come about. And that it was well planned, allowed for. So the whole thing about Reagan going in there and telling Gorbachev, tear down that wall, Reagan did, with all good intentions, try and attack communism. But even with Reagan and everything he understood from being in the Workers' Guild, understanding the communism that was there, the problem is, once again, as we are seeing active, very active, is the deep state. The deep state is that collusion and has been that collusion between the State Department, the intelligence agencies, and our enemies, both China and Russia. I think it's very important to understand as we, again, I'm going to drive it and try and get you to look at the present elections. It's not just the fact that we have these problems in the voting systems. We have problems in those that are running for office. It's very obvious with the Democrats. Very clear, very obvious that they are the shells of the enemy, that they are there to help continue to bring the United States as a free-thinking, independent nation into that global communist environment. Some say, well, it's not communist, Tom. It's all about the, all the big money people. Well, my friends, the big money people help fund communism early on. Who do you think funded Marx? Who do you think funded Karl Marx? Trotsky had some good money. And then who else had some good money? Who was the other person that hung around with Marx? And Marx spent his time in America. And what did he do? He went out to raise money. And during World War II, the Roosevelt administration sent a lot of money and gold and technology to Russia. That coffee's good. Gives you some time to think. So when we look at this, and we look at this article here, we want to jump over to another article about the same time frame that I thought was very good. Well, actually a little bit later. Was here with none other than out of New Zealand, came out of a Trevor Loudon blog, and this one was in 2015. And the Clenched Fist, revisiting Goleston's predictions. Now this one goes through New Lies for Old a little bit more succinctly. Author on this one is Brent Parrish. Well done, very well done. And as he takes and he goes through a little bit on both books, but primarily focuses on New Lies, he talks about the feigned disunity of the communist world promotes real disunity in the non-communist world. False alignments formed with third parties by each side against the other make it easier to achieve specific communist goals. such as acquisition of advanced technology or negotiation of armed control agreements or communist penetration of Arab and African states. The westernized a military, political, and economic ideological threat from the world communism appears to diminish. Real world, we're seeing a lot of that with China. And if you think that China and Russia have been adversaries, that's another deception. So when we go through all of this old information, 1984-ish, we come to the realization, the facts that it's been heavily contrived and that, in fact, it has been well planned. And because the Westernism, in its arrogance, going back, quite frankly, to what we opened the statement with and we opened the program with, is that it all comes down to this solipsism, which means that, guess what? Your own existence is the only thing that is real. Now, that philosophy is not only as it's brought out in these books and all of this information, and Nyquist does a lot. I'm referencing his blogs and writings significantly. And in that, what he's got going on is that we're seeing this philosophy on you're the only thing that exists. We see that so much in our culture right now. We see that in the youth. We see that in these political pundits even, as well as we see it in the politicians, those running for office, particularly on the Democratic side. But the travesty in that is what we're seeing with our youth. And I just read an article this week as well, is that a professor out of one of the Eastern universities claiming the destruction that COVID did to the school system. Well, what about everything else that's been done to the school system? What about all that is in social emotional learning? What is there about critical race theory? What is there about all this transgender nonsense? Across the whole U.S., test scores have bottomed in relationship to every other country, especially the progressive countries, India, Japan, other Southeast Asian entities that are forcing their kids to really learn. Here, it's going down that communist line. And I love the fact that Trump, excuse me for divesting for a moment or digressing for a moment, is I love the fact that Trump is saying that this is now communism that is in control. It is. It's been well planned. So out there from your pulpits, you need to start taking and thinking that through. You need to go back and understand these truths. And I know that even at the seminaries, which I call cemeteries, they have been destroying the minds of those that will go out to the pulpits. No longer free thinkers. They're being inculcated in all of this wokeness, this destruction, this soft theology, to the extent that they don't even know what's right from wrong. And you see so many of the leftist churches that exactly what the communists planned are so far away from the true gospel that there's nothing there of eternal substance. Sam Adams understood that eternal substance. He understood that it was not about we only or one person only. It was about a larger concept of governance that was not just for the here and now, not just for what we see, breathe, and feel here on this earth, in this life, But it goes beyond that. What is governance in relationship to that for all of eternity? How do we understand that the sovereign of the universe has expectations for us on how to govern here on earth? Sam Adams understood that. He was clear on that, and he acted on it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns. The Anti-Federalist got it right, and I haven't even introduced myself in the first two segments. This is Tom Navolis, your host. Delighted you're here, and this is serious stuff. As I was finishing in the last segment, is that Sam Adams clearly understood the moral context of everything we're talking about. John Adams wrote about it in his dissertation on Canon and Feudal law. And what we're, again, seeing is that tyranny and despotism sets up that feudal type of mercantile mechanisms for economic rule and the rule of those despots. I don't have the opportunity or time to delve into the depth of these revisiting Golitsyn's predictions, as I opened and started talking about in the last segment. But I did want to take and touch basis on some conclusion in the article that's there on the Trevor Loudon website. And the conclusion that is in that article is who's going to listen. Now, I know that maybe a majority of you won't listen. And I believe that to be true because the majority of folks out there have not listened, especially anybody that's on Christian radio. You're not listening necessarily to the depth of what is really going on. So I hope you do. I hope you go back to the references, actually, and hear from people that know more than me. I'm just trying to, once again, stimulate you in one way or another to go and investigate this and then to take and bring it to the pulpits where it belongs. And remember that our founders, the pulpits were the strongest place. I can only take you back to the book that I'm reading to my grandkids that I'm trying to get finished up, is that which Mr. Headley said, is that, paraphrasing, the churches, the pulpits, were so commonplace in their influence, their intent, their directions for the change of this nation, that's why there wasn't a lot written about it, because it was assumed that everybody will always know what John Adams said. This Constitution is only for a moral and religious/virtuous people, as Madison said. We haven't done a good job of producing those, as I always say. So some of the predictions that are here, go read the articles for yourself, because if your eyes are not open by everything else that is going on around you and you think it's because the last days are upon us, then there's no hope for you, because you're not going to listen. You're going to continue to go sit on your roof waiting for someone to come and take you off the roof. And yep, they'll take you off the roof. When you pass out and you slide down and hit the ground, they'll have to take you to the hospital. So with that, I want to move on to the very interesting article that is voting related. But before I do that, this is what I want to also bring to bear, is that a number of years ago, I talked about the Congressional Progressive Caucus and the number of people that are in there. So just if you take and you look at, the Senate member that is well identified as a socialist, that's Bernie Sanders without a question. Arizona has 2 in there. California has, what do we have here quickly, about 20. Maxine Waters being the big one that everybody knows about. Actually, Nancy Pelosi used to be a part of it, but to become speaker, she pulled her name out, so she was no longer a member of the Progressive Caucus. So need to go look at that in the references. Colorado has 2 representatives, Connecticut 1, Delaware, Florida 3, Georgia 2, Hawaii 1, Illinois has 3 members, Indiana, Kentucky, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, and then there's a whole list of others. Another site that I looked at for you that's very, very interesting is a list of Democratic Socialist America members who have held office in the United States. These are socialists, not even taking you down to the communists, but some that are either presently in the House of Representatives that are card-carrying socialists. You have a member from Illinois, one from Michigan, one from New York, actually 2 from New York, and 1 from Missouri. That's that Cori Bush. She's from Missouri. Formerly, even John Conyers from Michigan is a socialist, card-carrying socialist. Ron Dullum's, David Bonaire, and Major Omens. Then what I like about this particular site, it takes it to where it's very important, down to the state level. Upper houses in Colorado, Illinois, New York, Minnesota, New York, Pennsylvania, formally. And then it goes into the lower house in all the different states. Currently, there's 31 card-carrying socialists throughout the U.S. that are in various legislatures. There were 10 that were former. It goes down to city councils and county commissioners. Currently, at the city council level and county commissioner level, there are 70 card-carrying socialists. Understand that. You have a bunch of them, obviously, Vermont, Georgia even, Colorado, Texas has 1. Down in Austin being a very communist area. Illinois has a potload. Connecticut, California, Tennessee, Ohio, right here next to me, Lakewood, Ohio, has a city council member who is a card-carrying socialist. All the way through, Minnesota's got a pot of them. New York does as well. And you just go through this whole list, Massachusetts, California, Florida. And then it goes through a list of former ones also. And then other local officials like school board, card carrying, California, transit board, city, county council, school board, card carrying in all the various states. Very, very interesting. So that's a reference there that you can go check out. But understand, the point is to understand that who are and what's going on even in the so-called conservative movement. So there is a commentary for 16 October 2016 on Provokastia. Provokastia is the final wrap of Wolf on Moscow's strategic tapestry is now coming into view. And this is an analysis of the election and what was happening in it. The interesting point, though, that I want to bring out is that it always comes down to the definition of terminology. And the greatest mechanism that the communists have used for decades is the manipulation of words. So what they're doing here is that the Soviet deception, the organizational and operational tradition, is all about concepts which include the pronikivnia, which is penetration, provokastia, which is provocation, fabricatia is fabrication, the vasiria is diversion, agent prolihunia, agent vlinia, or agent influence. Disinformatia is disinformation. And then the carbonistia, this combination. And they actually, I love what this guy does, is that he actually puts people to these. And what he does is he puts it in this way to weave thus the translation in the proper and improper pronouns. So Barack Obama, he is the pronokavinia. Aleppo and Syria are the provocations. Donald Trump, Russian stooge, is the fabricatia, or the fabrication. That's all fabricated. Russian hackers is diversion. Hillary Clinton is the what? Agent of influence. And none other than the results of the 2016 presidential election in all the above are the combinatia. So the combination. And then he goes into this whole, how did that all weave together? What does that mean? What did it take into some very serious and interesting components? Talks about the Brazilian philosopher, which I quoted at the beginning. And very interestingly is that what's the end game? The end game here is like coming from the Communist Party USA has endorsed Hillary Clinton at that time, and they did so because it's a pro-Moscow party and that they are faithful to all of that. And they were saying here, according to John Bechtel, the national chair of the Communist Party USA, quote, "This election will be a national referendum on racism, misogyny, homophobia, xenophobia, and Islamophobia. The aim should be a landslide defeat of Trump and a decisive rejection of hate." Well, we see that all sounds familiar. He goes on to talk about it. And yet, what we're watching and we continue to see are the various attacks. So, the language doesn't change. It's how is it being utilized and implemented even now in the 2022 election. Let me summarize here in the last couple minutes, because I think that as I considered trying to draw this all together for this week, and quite frankly, I changed the topic for this week about 3 different times. We're so focused on economy that we've lost our ideas of liberty, as I've said for over a decade now. We lost the idea of liberty because liberty is not preached from the pulpits in its true and direct manner, in its biblical Reformation idea. The Protestant movement and Reformation understood that very clearly. And then those that came over, the Puritans in particular, knew how to apply it in a form of self-governance first, and then in governing in general, how to establish a constitutional republic within a format that is very easily defined if you understand biblical truth. It's not easy to implement. The whole idea of Christian nationalism is that you have to live the biblical truism first in your life, in your home, in your community, and you have to raise up people that understand how to do that as well. There's a lot of good candidates out there as we're getting ready to vote in a little over a week. And we'll have to follow up on this next week, because Sam Adams understood that when he talked about voting and what that all meant in his letter to his cousin John Adams, and making sure that everybody was, identifiable, especially the foreigners that came in and got naturalized that they had their papers so that they could prove that they were Americans. And the whole idea of our American culture has become not divested, it has become destroyed because we haven't enforced the founders' intent for becoming Americans. And what did that mean? What did that look like? So come on back next week when Sam Adams returns and watch how you pick your candidates. See you then.